Testing, 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 test, test. Testing, test, test. Testing, one, two. Testing, test, test, one, two.
Yes. Yay! Okay, good. He should sit up here on one of these things.
Testing, test, test, one, two.
No, life's fine, Zach. I'm like 3 copies in. It'd be really bad if the crash.
Welcome us to this. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. If we can please be seated so we can get this workshop started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Aides Castro. I'm a senior field representative with Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon. We welcome you officially to the city of Linwood. We're very excited about everything that we are going to hear today, as well as take the opportunity to take input from you guys as well. This is a very important opportunity for all of us. One of the biggest complaints is always we don't get to participate in the process. So that will no longer be an excuse. That's exactly what we're all going to be doing today, which is participating in the process. So again, welcome on behalf of the Linwood City Council. We have Councilwoman Maria Teresa Santillan Beas today. She's in the back. If you could give her a round of applause. As well as Linwood City Manager Mr. Arnoldo Beltran and his staff, who will also be here taking notes and also giving input. And for those of you who approved the applications, remember how nice the city of Linwood was to you. On that note, I'd like to invite our great Speaker of the Assembly of the 63rd Assembly. Oh, no, that's not. There's an in-between. We changed some stuff. Okay, what did we change? Oh, okay, so there's been a change of plan. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mr. Miguel Luna from Urban Semillas, and he will take it on from here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to our co-hosts, the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, Mary Beth Vergara, and Mark Stanley. Also, we're joined by Alf Brandt from the Speaker's Office, Veronica Sendejas, the District Director, and thank you again, Aide, for your hospitality here. We're also joined by our panelists, Tracy Billington from the State Department of Water Resources, Russ Bryden from LA County Flood Control District, and John Christensen from the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. And to all of you, thank you for making time. We have a great mix of grassroots folks here, along with county, city representation, statewide organizations, water districts, and nonprofits, and organizations that look at water and the environment through an essential equity and quality of life lens. We're here because Proposition 1 is a result of the hard work that our speaker did by traveling the state to listen and conduct a water needs assessment that was then converted into legislation. Legislation that ensures that disadvantaged communities would have a fair chance at accessing funds so that we too can receive a local return on our investment. And even now with his added responsibilities to the state as a whole in his role as Speaker of the Assembly, his commitment to the people and the issues of his district is unwavering. So, I'd like to welcome up the speaker, and I think this is a really good mark because this is 6 months from March. It is from March 7th. From when, so this is even more special. Thank you for joining us.
It's my anniversary. I didn't even know. It's kind of makes it like my wedding anniversary in that way too. December 10th. Just kidding. Thanks. I want to thank Miguel, and I want to thank Miguel first of all for putting this together and for bringing together all the NGOs and the consultants from throughout LA County. I also want to thank Miguel for thanking my staff, which is important. I'm often or always referred to as the author of the water bond. I didn't write anything. I don't remember turning on my computer and hitting a single button on the keyboard. Alf Brandt wrote the water bond right there. I'm the inspiration for all good things, Alf. If there's problems with the water bond, it's Alf's problem. But early on, when we were talking about the water bond in its earliest inception, keep in mind, if you think about the context in which we did it, it had been something that had been kicked around for like 7 years, and nobody had been able to get it off the ground. So those first conversations were very sort of large in scale and somewhat theoretical, but what was really important to us was the disadvantaged communities piece. We talked about it over and over again, and making sure that was going to be in the final product. There were a lot of conversations about what that meant, right? There was a federal definition of a disadvantaged communities, and there had been a state parks bond that had a different definition of disadvantaged communities. But for us, it was always about including disadvantaged communities and making sure there was a set aside for disadvantaged communities in the final product. That's important because of my district. My district is comprised of a number of disadvantaged communities. Whatever equation you use to define disadvantaged communities, I have 9 cities. 8 of my 9 cities have poverty rates of 20% or more. But also, as we took the tour, and Miguel talked about the tour that we took, we did, the legend of the water bond keeps growing. I think there were 16 water bond hearings. Sometimes I say 18. If I want to make the myth a little bigger, I say 20. In about 10 years, I'm going to say we had 80 water bond hearings. There were somewhere between 16 and 18 hearings that we did, from Pomona to Redding to Coachella to Seaside to Buena Park. And we found that there were, no matter what part of the state you were in, there was always a sort of concentration of disadvantaged communities, which found it very difficult to tap into to grant funds and just funds in general. So not only was the disadvantaged communities piece of Proposition 1 something that Alf and I wanted to make sure happened at the outset, but also the technical assistance piece was really important as well. So I want to thank Alf for all that he did. It's important in the water community to know the product, that this was Alf's work product. But aside from that, we had a great victory locally because of the funds that were allocated from a battery recycling program that'll go towards the Exide cleanup, and that was Alf's genius this past week as well. So thank you, Alf, for all that you do. I also want to thank the folks from DWR for being here to answer questions and share information, as I know you'll be doing later. When it comes to water, one of the most important pieces of the puzzle is conservation. But this event also shows that another vital piece of the puzzle is conversation. Get it? I'll play on words there. I didn't write this. Is that you, Alf? Okay. Because I was going to reverse myself on your genius. But again, the water bond developed out of this sort of ongoing conversation throughout the state through these various hearings, and we wanted to make sure that the allocation of funds sort of mimicked that as well. And today's discussion is part of that. This culture of collaboration and of conversation, particularly here in disadvantaged communities. So if the water bond is to be implemented in the way that it was designed and the way that the people of this region and others deserve that it be implemented, it's important that people in this room talk together, talk openly, talk freely, and talk as real partners in the process. These are real funds, not just window dressing. Community participation has to be real as well. Including the 10% DAC funds was one of the top priorities in writing Proposition 1. $9.8 million for the Los Angeles region is very significant. I want those funds to have a real impact, and I want impacted communities to have a real voice, and that's why we're here today. So through getting together like this today, we could ensure that NGOs, CBOs, and other entities working with disadvantaged communities in our region are well aware that they can be part of the process. Getting money out of the door isn't enough. Anyone can do that. Our challenge is to ensure that the funds are spent as effectively as possible to maximize the lasting benefits of our communities. Years from now, if all we can say is, look how much money we spent in DACs, then we failed. We need to be able to say, look at the outcomes and how they were driven by the funding decisions that we made. I'm encouraged because I see a similar process working out in our efforts to revitalize the LA River, and our partners on that project are here as well today. There's been a great cooperation between communities, NGOs, the county, and private funders. The AB 530 working group, another genius of Alf Brandt. You're starting to wonder what the hell I do all day, right? The AB 530 working group has been an effective way of keeping stakeholders and communicating. Even then, concerns and misunderstandings do pop up. So doing what you're doing today helps to build a foundation of openness and trust that can weather the occasional misunderstanding. Proposition 1 addresses some of California's most serious challenges. It is also one of the accomplishments that I'm most proud of. I'm committed to seeing this through. I hope today will be one of many discussions. And by getting out of our individual silos and talking with each other, we can ensure that DAC funds do the greatest good in our communities. I hope that you're looking forward to that as well. But ultimately, what's most important for me today is from all of you to hear from one another, not just from me. But I'm happy to take some questions at this time, which I understand I'm going to do. Any questions? I almost got away with it, huh? Yes, ma'am. I just got back from an hour with the LA Times editorial board, so there are no unfair questions today. You can ask me whatever you want. When we did sort of an assessment of California's water infrastructural needs at the outset of the water bond, I think we ended up with about $800 to $100 billion in need that we had in the state. This bond pays for 8 to 10% of our overall needs. What's important for me about this water bond is obviously not the panacea for all of our water infrastructural needs. It was never designed to be, and it can't be. There's just not enough funds in it. What's important is that people see that the funds distributed through Prop 1, Prop 1A, that those funds have a real impact on water supply, on people's lives, on whether you're working in the fields in Hanford or trying to work in the fields in Hanford, but you can't because of the drought, or whether you're suffering from groundwater contamination in the San Gabriel Valley, as they have been for a generation, that you see that the impact of these funds are real. We know that as a legislature, we know we're going to have to go back at some point, if we're responsible lawmakers, we know we're going to have to go back to the California voters and say, hey, look, we need more money because we're only paying for about 8% of our water infrastructural needs. If the voters say to us, yeah, last time you spent that money effectively and it's had a real impact, then that's a success. If the voters say there was a lot of pork, there was a lot of garbage, there was stuff in there that didn't have a real impact on people's lives, a lot of it went towards administration, then I think we can consider Prop 1A a failure. Other questions? Thanks, guys.
The speaker's going to hang around with us for a little bit. So I want to move us along so that the speaker can be part of the conversation briefly. And so with that, Tracy, so there's Prop 1, and now it comes to the Department of Water Resources, and what does the Department of Water Resources do with your process?
Hello, I'm Tracy Billington with Department of Water Resources, and I manage the Proposition 1 IRWM grant program, and thank you for having me here today. So what I'm going to do is keep my remarks very brief so there can be more of a discussion. So we do have a set of guidelines and what we're calling a request for proposal out for these funding, this disadvantaged community involvement funding, and that is what we're going to use to guide how we administer the funds. But in our our key mark process for this is to be very flexible and to work with the different funding areas to identify what work should be done at the individual funding area, which is like a hydrologic region. So the LA Ventura funding area, we're looking at for a collective evaluation and a needs assessment at a large scale effort. And we want to work with folks because there's such a variation in California on what are the issues, what are the types of communities, what are the needs, what are the water management concerns. Some places it's supply, some places it's water quality. So we are really trying to say, let's work with groups and come up with what is needed as opposed to being a top-down proposal. When we're talking about disadvantaged communities, for this funding, we're also talking about the economically distressed areas and underrepresented communities, which are two of the terms are defined, one is undefined, and we're allowing folks to say, explain to us why a community is underrepresented. So if the median household income doesn't work to say this community is disadvantaged, you have the ability to explain to the department why the community is underrepresented. So we are trying to be very inclusive and working with folks. And we're also looking at this as kind of a building block. So before we rush into project funding, we need to understand what the issues are and how communities are effectively involved in IRWM and to help develop projects. So some of the activities that could be funded are project development activities. We have a very liberal definition on what we'll fund. So actual project work could be funded. Our limitations are basically no punch and cookies, no stipends, and nothing that's inconsistent with what the bond funds were authorized for. So we are trying to be very generous on this. We also have up to at least $51 million available for projects disadvantaged community statewide, and that is a minimum funding. So hopefully the disadvantaged community involvement money that we're talking about today will lead to actual project implementation. But that can't be the only measure of success because there are a variety of reasons why projects may or may not go forward. And we're looking at this as a unique opportunity. We're also hoping that it is not our only opportunity. So hopefully that the excellent work that comes out of these activities will build to future endeavors. And with that, I will conclude my remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. And I just want to pick up on your last point that, we don't see this 9.8 million as just an exercise that serves this particular bond, that we see this as a catalyst and as a good way to really put to exercise the relationships that the speaker talked about, that there is a dialogue amongst all of us, that we benefit from this conversation, from learning from each other, from water departments to county to agencies to nonprofits to NGOs. I mean, we really do benefit from that dialogue. And so it would be a waste, it would be a real waste of $10 million if we used it, we did something with it, and it was just for this bond. So thank you for allocating, for fighting for those sort of 10%, and we really should make the best of it. And with that, I'd like to call Russ to give us an overview of brief overview of what the county's role is within this process.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for having us here today. Can you hear me? I suffer from being quite tall. Maybe I'll just shout. I'm not sure this microphone's going to work. My name is Russ Bryden. I'm with the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works, Flood Control District. I'm the program manager for the local IRWIMP program, amongst other tasks. We're going to hand out some handouts here today to help you understand the program we're offering. So no PowerPoint today. We'll refer to handouts. That's a blessing to you, I think. So let's talk about outcomes. I want to use the couple minutes I have here to introduce you to the... Should we hold it? Is this better? It's much better. You know, another wife joke here. I'm never accused of being quiet. I'm accused of being quite large. So for you to say that you can't hear me is a wonderful thing. I'm taking that back. Thank you for that today. So we're handing out some handouts which should help you understand the structure of how we're setting up the process to use this $9.8 million to encourage outreach. So first of all, I want to define some outcomes for my little point here, for my little talk, what I want you to be able to take back. So I'm going to use my time to share with you how we're managing the program, and especially to share with you how you can participate. Your participation is key to this. What we want to avoid at all costs is a small group of people, especially a small group of privileged people, sitting in a back room someplace making decisions on how funding should be used for DAC communities. I think we have to acknowledge that many of us that are in leadership positions in the public sector don't fully understand DACs. We don't understand how to communicate with DACs. We don't always understand DAC needs, and we need you to help us understand. We need you to help us form this process to make sure that we have a positive outcome and that we can achieve the speaker's goal. So some of the core principles for how we're going to approach this are involvement and transparency. Let's take a look at the handouts that hopefully you have in front of you now. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is on a web page. So first thing is, if you don't catch something I say or if you're participating remotely, please go to our web page to learn more about how we're handling the process. The web page is www.lawaterplan.org. So lawaterplan.org. There's a big link top center of the page for the DACIP grant. Click on that link and it will share all the information that we're talking about today. So transparency involvement. We want to make sure that you're part of this process. We want to make sure that we hear from you how this should move forward. So first thing here is $9.8 million. I want to talk about what the purpose of that is. It's $9.8 million to increase involvements of DACs in water resources planning processes and to help water resource agencies like mine and others better understand those community needs. So we're out there to listen to you and to better understand your needs. That's what this $9.8 million is for. We're excited to be able to do this. So the first thing to remember in this process, and Tracy used some jargon that I'm not sure we're all familiar with, so I'll take just a second and explain it, is that it's $9.8 million for the LA Ventura funding area. Does that make sense to everyone? So there's 2 counties in LA and Ventura funding area, LA and Ventura. There's actually 3 IRWIMP groups, 3 separate IRWIMP groups. I'm the program manager for one of those IRWIMP groups, but there's 2 other separate IRWIMP groups. So these groups are the Greater LA IRWIMP group. That's for the LA Basin. That's where we are today. There's the Santa Clara IRWIMP, or Santa Clara River IRWIMP. That's for the Santa Clarita area, also part of Los Angeles County, but a separate IRWIMP group. And then there's the Ventura County IRWIMP, which covers most of Ventura. So our first job will be getting these 3 IRWIMP groups together and coming up with one comprehensive plan for how to outreach, how to set this up for the entire funding area. So to do that, we've established a committee with representatives from each of the 3 IRWIMPs. It will be a consensus-based committee. The entire committee will have to decide, or will have to agree unanimously on how we want to move forward. And we seek your feedback with this committee. So although there's 6 members, 2 members from each of the IRWIMPs, the group acknowledges that it's their job to make sure that we write a grant that's consistent with Tracy's guidelines, but in order to do that, we need to hear from you. So go to the web page, learn when these folks are meeting. Please call in, please attend in person if you can, but find some way to share with us your experience to make sure we're setting this up correctly. So within the 3 IRWIMP groups, there's this Super DAC, the DACIP committee. 2 members from each of the individual IRWIMP groups. As I said, I'm the program manager for the Greater LA IRWIMP group, and that's what I'll primarily be speaking about today. So in Greater LA, we actually have a standing DAC committee. That committee is charged with many of the same things that the DACIP grant is meant for, to help us understand DACs, to help us understand their needs, to find a way to get them involved. We've done some interesting work with this. I think we've done some neat studies about how to communicate with DACs in urban areas, but we haven't been very successful with implementing this. So we've gained a little bit of knowledge, and we can definitely build on that, but now we need to figure out how to actually implement this and make sure that we're hearing from folks like you, NGOs, CBOs, that we are doing the right things, that we are understanding how to reach out to DAC committees, or to DAC communities. So this DAC committee in Greater LA will be setting up the scope of work for this $9.8 million. And when I say 9.8, remember, that's divided by 2 counties into 3 different IRWIMP groups. This committee meets at the moment twice a month to develop the scope of work, and then we'll see what happens after that. And again, the committee's information when they meet is all on our website. So I strongly encourage you, more than encourage, we can't be successful without your help. This isn't a matter of transparency. This is a matter of recognizing who the subject matter experts are. And that's you folks in the room, others like you, and the communities themselves. So we need your help to do this. Please go to the webpage, understand when or find out when our meetings are, and find a way to participate. To that end, hopefully, someplace, we have multiple contact information sheets floating around. If you're interested at all in helping us make this process better and teaching us what we need to do, showing us what we need to do, please fill that contact information out. We will include you in the process. If you go to the webpage itself, it has a place where you can sign up for notifications of when meetings are. Hopefully it's a one-stop shop to make sure you're involved. So just in closing here, I want to repeat these principles of you understand DACs. We understand a little bit, but we recognize you're the subject matter experts. We need your help. It's not a matter of transparency, although that's what we strive for. We need you to make this successful. And fill out that contact information sheet so we can hear from you soon. With that, I think we'll take questions in a minute. Mr. Luna?
Mr. Brady? Thank you, Russ. So it's a lot, right? I mean, there's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of different folks involved. And we need to figure this out. Because, again, we don't want to let this opportunity of $10 million not be spent the best way. And you have the people that are saying, we need your input. So everybody who RSVP'd, and if you didn't and you wrote your email, we'll make sure to send you out information so that you can stay up to date on when these meetings take place. Russ also made reference to another sheet that's being passed around, which adds a little bit more of data requests, which is geographically the areas that you serve. And that's very important as well, so that they can do a targeted engagement plan. Our last speaker, who will then be a panelist and be here to take some comments while the speaker's here, is John Christensen. And he and his team at UCLA, at the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, did an evaluation of Prop 84 funds that have been spent so far. And this is, when you say in hindsight, this is it, in hindsight. So in hindsight, there's this Prop 84 that we passed, and he's going to tell us a little bit of how that money was spent. And the title of it is Environmental Bonds Should Equitably help me out, bro.
Now it's hard.
No. Equitably, thank you, sir. Benefit all communities. Looking forward based on an analysis of Prop 84. John, please, you should, if you hear me mess up like that, get up quickly.
I'm glad you had to announce the title. It's not me. So Miguel told me that when I got here that I've got 5 minutes instead of 8, so I've been feverishly cutting what I have to say. So there's a lot of detail in here. There's more. You'll be able to find more. I have copies of the report if anyone is interested. So as Miguel said, earlier this year, we completed a first ever analysis of bond spending and equity in California communities. That we could do this analysis is testament to how far we've come in California and the potential for really getting this right now with good data, the kind of study that we did, and certainly with the engagement that you all are doing. And Prop 1 will be the next test. I'd like to quickly review our findings and reflect briefly on potential lessons for Prop 1. We looked at $2 billion spent under Prop 84 so far on 2,174 projects with an identifiable local impact, where we could determine that if you lived in a community, you would see and feel the impact. The bottom line is that we found that when priorities were clearly spelled out, Funds were spent according to those priorities. By contrast, when priorities were only vaguely stated, we found that spending was not closely aligned with those priorities. Although parks and urban greening were listed as a priority for the bond as a whole, overall we found that communities that lack parks received less funding than communities that already have parks. We found that less Prop 84 funding has been spent in disadvantaged communities than in communities with higher median household income. And we found that rural areas with lower population density receive just as much funding as urban areas with large populations. What that means is that residents in rural areas within a half-mile walking distance of projects saw $7,475 per capita spending in their neighborhoods, while residents in urban areas saw $209 in per capita spending. Now, Prop 84 has an interesting experiment embedded in it. $400 million of the total $5.4 billion was spent under the provisions of AB 31, enabling legislation that stated that underserved communities and creation of parks in neighborhoods where none currently exist shall be given preference. That those were priorities, and it spelled out specific criteria for meeting those priorities and for critically underserved communities. That worked. Of the $358 billion spent so far under AB 31, we found that $346 million has been spent in urban communities, $312 million in underserved park-poor communities, and $276 million of the total has been spent in disadvantaged communities. Communities that met all three criteria, urban, park-poor, and disadvantaged, received $244 million of the total. By contrast, when Prop 84 allocated $500 million for state parks, it set a much looser priority for $400 million of that spending that should go to improving existing facilities, protecting natural resources, and, quote, expansion of the state park system to reflect the growing population and shifting population centers and needs of the state. While urban communities received 60% of that funding, park-poor communities received only 19%. And communities that are both park-poor and urban received only 13%. Overall, communities that had more park acres per 1,000 people already received more funding than communities with fewer parks. Another part of Prop 84 allocated funding for water quality and safety. Disadvantaged communities were mentioned as among the many priorities for this funding. We found that 51% of the $143 million spent so far with an identifiable local impact on water quality and safety went to disadvantaged communities that are home to about 40% of the state. However, we found unclear results in this section of Prop 84 when it came to its primary mission, water quality and safety. The distribution of funds in relation to groundwater contamination and drinking water quality problems could as well have been random. Communities identified as having more groundwater contamination and drinking water quality problems by a Cal EnviroScreen received no more funding than communities with fewer groundwater contamination and drinking water quality problems. When it came to traditional resource protection and conservation under Prop 84, we found that 77% of this funding went to rural areas, while urban areas received 23%, so that rural residents within walking distance of projects saw $9,860 in per capita spending, while residents in near urban projects saw $161 in per capita spending in their neighborhoods. And only 36% of this funding went to disadvantaged communities. Moreover, communities with higher median household income received as much funding as communities with lower income. So the benefits we see in disadvantaged communities could as well be random. Our report is available online. I have copies here, and you can use it to explore Prop 84 grants throughout the state and generate custom PDFs of any area you select, or download a table or the whole database and do your own analysis if you'd like. We should be able to do this easily for all of our environmental bond spending and other bond spending for that matter. And we have some basic recommendations for doing that, as well as some very specific recommendations that we would be delighted to see included in future measures and in planning to carry out projects. It's great in reading through Prop 1 to see some of these things already in place in terms of reporting results and priorities. The most important thing is setting out criteria in advance that can be followed through at the end to evaluate results, learn, improve, and ultimately get the results that voters like you approve. Now, Prop 1 has specific language throughout the measure prioritizing disadvantaged communities, and in some cases allocating specific percentages of up to $4.45 billion in spending to disadvantaged communities. So it's not just this $9.8 million that's at stake. There's a lot more at stake. This is a way into the process. Prop 1 and with, a salute to Alf Brandt and Speaker Rendon is a big step in the right direction in the history of environmental bond spending in California. It goes even further than Prop 84. But how these funds are divvied up will be determined by the project solicitation and evaluation guidelines developed by agencies, as well as the efforts of advocates and leaders in disadvantaged communities. This will be another interesting and very important experiment in advancing equity in environmental funding in California. As a researcher, we will be eager to study the results, which will depend on efforts like yours across the state. And if there's anything we can do to help you with your good work, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, John. On a point that was made that really captured, as I was reading your report, John, was that when monies are not explicitly earmarked for DACs, they do not get spent on DACs. So this $2 billion that were out there that are about conservation of the environment, our rivers, protecting our streams, which people of color predominantly vote for these bonds and make these bonds pass, don't get to reap the benefits and don't get the fair share of the investment. And when you look at the disparity in amounts of $9,680 compared to $261, that is a big disparity. And that's something that we need to remediate. So we have the speaker for 15 minutes, and I'd like to open it up for some questions and some comments. And I would ask that, if you have a comment, please make it brief so that we could engage with the speaker while he's here. After that, Alf will join us as part of the dialogue, and Veronica's here from the district office as well, so those comments will be captured. So I'm going to stay up here because I want to make sure that I help you through your question and your comment so that we can have time. And so if you raise your hand, I'll call on you. Yes, ma'am.
So that everybody can.
All right. Okay, when Prop 1 was passed, there was a pot of money, $100 million for LA County that wasn't allocated when some of the other funding was, and I think there was maybe disagreement about which conservation agencies should get it in the county. What's the status of that pot? Has it been allocated, or has any?
So there's and that has to do with $100 million that are available through the conservancies, Mr. Brown.
There was $100 million allocated to the Los Angeles River and Los Angeles San Gabriel River, but to the two conservancies that cover that. One is the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. The other one is Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, which covers, it's the lower Los Angeles River, so that covers the lower and they cover the mountain. It was not appropriated this year. There was a debate about how much each gets. LAO last fall, issued a report recommending that the legislature set priorities for how that's going to be so that the agencies can plan for it. How that split's going to be, it didn't recommend a split. But Mr. Rennan, Speaker Rennan, has advocated from the beginning, since he worked on the bond and negotiated the bond, that it would be 50-50. The pro tem would rather it be 60-40, 60% for the upper river. So that's why, because of that difference, it was not resolved this year, and so it was not appropriated.
Yeah, that's been a source of controversy. We thought we had a verbal agreement when the bond was finalized that it would be 50% for the upper river, 50% for the lower river. I think just seems fair. Other people think it should be 60% for the upper river and 40% for the lower river.
Thank you. Another question. There's a question there. Either. And then I have another.
Hi, I'm Jane Williams with California Communities Against Toxics. And first of all, Speaker, I want to thank you so much for your help on the battery fee bill that we just passed. What a huge victory for environmental justice communities across the state.
Christina Garcia, who represents our neighboring communities, she did all the work.
She was awesome, but you
amazing.
were awesome too. I know the inside story on that. So we have been working for the last 2.5 years, convening people working on water and specifically groundwater contamination in the Los Angeles County area. And this conversation really speaks to me about the need for some sort of metric. And as you know, we created CalEnviroScreen. It has 14 different attributes. It has lots of metrics in it. And we are trying to get regulatory agencies with water, with waste, with air, enforcement agencies, intellectual capital, cap and trade money, focused in on these areas. And I understand that we have a different definition of environmental justice communities here when it comes to water, which is fine, but it makes it a little bit more, I think, challenging to tie into what the folks at UCLA did on trying to see exactly what kind of an impact we're having. And I'm wondering if we are thinking about some sort of metrics, so that as we move forward on picking out which projects we want to fund, and then we go, 10 years from now when we look back, we have some sort of measuring stick by which we can measure them. So it's not so much a question, but maybe that's something we need to think about, is developing a finer metric. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Tracy, anybody else want to add to that conversation?
Well,
And then,
one of the obligations is for the agencies that are administering funds to set up performance metrics. Oh, okay. Can you see an on button? Okay, there we go.
I think it's
Okay. Okay, so one of the requirements is for the agencies to set up metrics that are administering the bonds. We are working on that, and with the other agencies and through the Bond Accountability website, that information, you'll be able to find information on how the bonds are administered. For the CalEnviroScreen metric, that is not linked to the Proposition 1 funding. So our definition of disadvantaged communities is based upon median household income. And the same is for the economically distressed areas. It's basically median household income plus other economic factors. CalEnviroScreen is one tool that you could use for showing a problem. There's not a direct link to the program. Some areas, CalEnviroScreen is not a good indicator on disadvantaged community status. Basically, if you look at the north end of the state of California, there are no disadvantaged communities based upon CalEnviroScreen because it's more the environmental quality as opposed to other factors. So all of our tools have limitations, and that's why we're looking at a collection of them.
Thank you, Tracy. We have a question, Adan, and then I have
Yes,
Colin
Adan.
here. Oh, John.
Our study used the statutory definition of disadvantaged communities rather than the CalEnviroScreen, but we did turn to CalEnviroScreen as a source of data for the groundwater and water quality and safety. And I totally agree with you. I mean, in order to be able to do this kind of research, we do have to have at least some kind of measure that there's some consensus around, or else you end up interminably debating the metrics rather than actually getting at what the results are.
So let me repeat that. How is the, and then I'm going to get to it then, how is the public going to be engaged in setting these metrics, Tracy?
I think we should probably talk to the Resources Agency. I think it hasn't been set through the guidelines. Most of our metrics are along the lines of the type projects we're funding for our program. So we have a wide variety of types of activities we could fund with the type of benefits we would expect. We're not going to the level of detail to say, you know, we anticipate so many additional acre feet or so much water quality improvements through these funds. It's a higher level metric, but it's probably a discussion for a different day in a different forum, because we should be emphasizing the disadvantaged community involvement activities here, but I would be more than happy to talk to you.
So it sounds like this is something we can follow up on. Gene, Adan?
Yes, Adan Ortega. I work with mutual water companies around the state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Alf, for including mutual water companies as eligible applicants under Prop 1. My question is, how are you treating compliance? There's a lot of small systems that in poor, older, and smaller communities that could benefit a lot from rehabilitated infrastructure and so forth in this region as well. I'm just wondering, how are you handling compliance if there's an issue with the Safe Drinking Water Act or with the Clean Water Act, as a matter of fact?
This is probably also another discussion for a longer term project. So when we're getting to our implementation funding, which we will hopefully be developing the program processes for that in the near future, we have the internal debate. If you have a compliance issue, you have the existing obligation to upgrade it. Therefore, should you have state funds available? If you have a compliance issue, obviously you're the highest priority. So we should make the state of funding available, especially for the communities that can't do it on their own. In the past, we have tended to say it helps, it's not something we'll hold against you, unless it may be something like a, you know, you're violating a cleanup and abatement order and you're willfully out of compliance. And so it's more along the lines of, if you have an issue and you need the assistance, we want to make the funds available to help that. There is also the state board funding for the Safe Drinking Water and the Clean Water Act, which is for the specific projects, and that's something that if you need those contacts, I can help you with that.
Thank you, Tracy. Really, no questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Colin, you had your hand.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Colin Bailey with the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. Thank you again for the great work on Proposition 1. And thank you, John, for your work. I think the results confirm what our statewide organization that works very much with water disadvantaged communities relay on a daily basis. And there is a difference between benefits that derive from people coming into a community and doing a project for a community versus those projects that are the product of the community being directly engaged and in fact hired with pay for a purpose to identify the needs that need to be met and then champion and move forward those solutions. I see in Proposition 1, and we and our colleagues work very hard with the Speaker's office, a significant methodological break from prior bonds. And so I'm actually interested to hear from the panel, since we have this interesting alignment, if you will, from author to agency implementer to local implementer, to hear what thoughts you have. Again, John's work shows how previous bonds, and EJCW was very instrumental in getting 10% set-asides, only to see a fairly checkered performance in terms of how those dollars actually met actual need on the ground and the legacy that they left. So our work has evolved into much more regional planning and capacity building, which is a potential activity within the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program. So again, the question being, to what degree is there alignment and accountability amongst you all up on this panel to see that the type of best practices that we and our colleagues around the state have championed, to see community-based participatory processes be the hallmark of what Proposition 1 implements?
That's a good question. I guess I'd have to find out what they think to see how much agreement there is. I think these types of participatory venues, for me, are part of that. And they're, like Miguel was saying in his introduction, some significant money on the table here, and we need to make sure that we're all on the same page in order to make sure that we access it at all, but access it successfly. I think in working on the bond, there was a tremendous amount of discussion between our office and a lot of the agencies responsible for the disbursement of funds. And keep in mind that the allocation mechanisms are different in the various pots. Depending on how you look at the bond, there's either 6 pots of money or 8 pots of money. But there are different mechanisms for dispersing the funds. So that certainly does complicate the accountability mechanism. But I mean, for me, part of the beauty of, I'm the first of the 12-year class in Sacramento, this 12-year term limited class, and we look in Sacramento, whether you, I hate to open a can of worms, but whether you look at the PUC or the Coastal Commission or the State Bar, you see what a lack of oversight has sort of rendered in our state. And I think being able to be here for 12 years and be able to write a bond in year 2, and by year 7 it'll have run its course in terms of the implementation of the funds, to be able to assess it after that point, and hopefully at some point have another author take another look at it, I think is one of the benefits of being able to serve for a long time. And part of that, I think, is the making sure that there's a consensus about, going back to the previous question, a consensus about what are common indicators of a proper distribution of funds, but also your question as well. What are an agreement about the appropriate programs and uses?
I would add to the speaker's comment, or pick up on the point that it's participation that's really key, but it has to be consistent. A lot of us have been at this for a long time. We're not going away. And one of the things that we are striving towards is to holding each other accountable. So those are my 2 cents. With that, I know the speaker has to go, and I promised him I'd get him out of here on time, so thank you very much. I want to invite Alf, if you could please join us, and John, if you can please join us. And then we have more time to continue our dialogue. And there is an exercise, and I'll let you pick up, John. There's an exercise I'd like for us to do before we leave here today. So at around 3:40, I'd like for us to take a look at these 3 boards that are in the back. Those are activities that were extracted from the DWR RFP of suggested activities with outcomes. And one of the things I want to, as part of our process and holding each other accountable, is I want us to go through a voting exercise where everybody will get 6 stickers. There's 9 activities. Do I still have time, Ross? Okay. There's 6 stickers and 9 activities, so there's a little bit of forced voting, because realistically, we can't do everything. And I just wanted to see if we couldn't do everything, what are the things that are of priority to the group here? And this is information that we'll pass on over to the county and to the Super DAC so that they take this into consideration. And hopefully it serves as a model too for other meetings, that we could start making a correlation between the groups and the priorities. So we see within this group, who were the demographics of this group and what was a priority to them, and it might differ.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can I ask you the audience question?
Yeah.
So you heard the speaker talk about how DACs see the results. So what I'd like to hear from folks is, how would you define that? How is it that communities of color and communities right here in the Southeast, how is it that that you think that they would see that there are results? I mean, these are regular people, the people who are voting on the water bond, not water wonks like me, but how is it? How would you define what them seeing it would be? Victor.
What do results look like?
I think you've got to look at mitigating institutions like elected officials, organizations, faith groups, etc. Because people have not gotten the services for so long, they've been accustomed to not having certain things. So it's a complicated issue. The results would have to be interpreted by the leaders of the community. So meetings like this is important so they can follow the process, keep each other accountable, as Miguel's saying. So I think it's going to be mitigating institutions like leaders in the community, organizations.
Miguel, if you would allow me, I'm gonna change a hat right now.
Okay.
So I'm gonna speak on behalf of Linwood. One of the problems that a lot of the Southeast communities, cities like Linwood, is they're facing budget issues. So the question becomes, do we have the staff with the expertise to apply for these grants and to manage them, or do we look for the money to hire a consultant to do that? And that's where it ends up stopping. So when we talk about disadvantaged communities, what is being discussed to ensure that the true disadvantaged communities of lower socioeconomic areas are receiving the proper support? Who's available to help them apply for these grants without them having to dip into their already deficient general budgets? Once they do get the grant, how do you support it? How do you maintain it? Because the Southeast communities are suffering greatly from old infrastructure, and some cities don't have the staff.
And that leads us to the thing that we put in there. A lot of money is committed in safe drinking water and other parts about technical assistance. And so the state board's created a one-stop shop or a office to try and do that. But how does this work in this program? And I guess I'd ask Tracy. How is that going to work? How is technical assistance, or maybe it is the county? I mean, is the county going to be able to offer assistance to communities like in the Southeast to do that kind of, even to help them get the grant?
And I think what we're looking at is a bit of a tag team effort. So the State Board's Office of Sustainable Water Solution has technical assistance that's available. It is primarily project focused. So to receive their technical assistance, it's got to be about developing a project. Our disadvantaged community involvement money is more in the planning and involvement issues. So we kind of have complementary activities where identifying what the needs are, trying to identify what projects might be needed, can be developed through the disadvantaged community involvement money. Once you're looking at trying to move a project forward, the technical assistance money from the state board can help. They also, again, this is marketing for the state board, but part of the items that were included in Proposition 1 was some startup financing for operations and maintenance for the treatment systems that are provided for paid for by the grant. So they have like 2-year startup financing for O&M funds while the new agencies or the communities get their long-term O&M rate structures and abilities in place.
Yeah, great. And I know, John, you wanted to jump in. The other thing, though, and this is something that Wendy Romalo from the Council for Water should help brought up at a meeting we had, and we talked about this, Al, is where's the operation and maintenance money once, let's say you do get past that hurdle of the technical capacity and you do get this application and then you build this beautiful park, and then how do you pay for the maintenance of it? And one of the things we talked about is, well, we have these measures through the county that are coming forward, and certainly you're looking at a park measure that could potentially have some operations and maintenance money for these parks. But then again, the key to be able to make those things happen, we have to have this we have to continue this, have this a conversation where we hold each other accountable, and we're not thinking in a siloed way, so that we are able to. There was no reason why during the parks measure we shouldn't be looking at water issues collectively. And that was something that Meredith from Heal the Bay kept bringing up. So we really have to have more of these conversations to make sure we're in sync. John, I know you wanted to comment, and then Grace, you have the next question.
So in addition to doing this kind of research, I'm also a historian, and my interest in history is understanding, like with this report, understanding the past for the present and for the future. And so I've been looking at California bonds over the last 30 years. And I've also been now looking at parks funding measures across the country in 27 different states. So what is the state of the art on this? And I think I can, with some great deal of confidence, now say that Proposition 1 is the state of the art when it comes to equity in environmental bonds. And the park funding measure that we have on the ballot here in LA County, tied to a needs assessment that's seriously engaged, with communities, is state of the art. And which is not to say that there's not a lot of work still to be done. And I think that this conversation shows that. I mean, the way in which serious attention was paid, numbers were put on paper for disadvantaged communities, technical assistance, the ability to use money for planning, all of these things add up to, I think, what is, and again, with tip of the hat to Alf Brandt and Speaker Rendon, is really, it's the best, it is the best of class example. But the proof is going to be in the pudding of how this all gets put together. Can the tag team work? So that communities are able to go through this engagement process, get the assistance they need to, for grants, for technical assistance, for planning, to put real projects that deliver results on the ground. No matter what, how the community defines those results. Is it a cleaned up waterway? Is it cleaner drinking water? Is it a park that is also retaining, retaining water? All kinds of things. But this is what's exciting about seeing this, is that the mechanisms are there, but there's no guarantee of success just because it's so well thought out and so well written. The key is in the implementation.
Why is there no guarantee to success? If we can set up a metric that says this is how it needs to be spent, why is there no guarantee of success? I mean, can I?
I think because it really is going to depend on all of you in this room, on the communities, on the advocates, on the organizers. I think, as I heard, Kevin De Leon, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, give a talk at a LA Neighborhood Land Trust event recently, where he said, we set up these mechanisms so that you can hold us accountable. But that's the key, right? I mean, it's that the groups really need. There are now some real hooks in these things, and there are real mechanisms to get money to do things for communities that have not had it, that have not had the technical. The funds to hire somebody in the way that wealthy communities in California have for decades. That's why they've gotten all the resources.
But and this is critical. It's making it real. Why did Mr. Rendon in those days, Mr. Rendon, why did he focus on this? And why did I start working for him? Because of Maywood. Because the three small mutual water companies in Maywood that served 1,000 connections each, had no resources and had no ability and were resistant to working together or doing anything else. And it was frustrating. But what made it real was that woman who invited him into her kitchen and turned on the tap. And he saw it firsthand, brown. That's what got him, and that was on the campaign, so that was before I even worked for him. But that's what made it real for him, that we've got to do something about this. And so that's what led to this conversation about disadvantaged communities and how are we taking care of it. But so my question to you is, how do we make it real like that? How do we make it real that these communities see real improvements? And that's a challenge. I don't know that I have the answer. So anyway, sorry. I've delayed you.
I have
This- yeah.
Grace.
I've been monitoring them, so we have this one, the lady in the back with the black coat, and then we have this one.
Debbie. Grace, and if you could introduce yourself, and I think it's a good opportunity as the DAC rep to. You should. No?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm Grace Cast. I'm the Executive Officer of the Gateway Water Management Authority, and I am now the Greater LA IRWIMP DAC Chair. So I'm interested in hearing everybody's input. As you know, Gateway is a very large disadvantaged community, as we were just talking about. So this is of great interest to me. I just wanted to make 2 points. When you were advertising for the state board, which I can appreciate, I did want to make one comment relative to DAC programs and their program, which I think is a major issue. They define eligibility for DACs in their programs as the entire area, meaning if a city or a water purveyor has 5% that's non-DAC, they are not eligible. Okay, so that is a major issue. It's how do you get funds if you cannot provide 100%, and it is in their definitions. So maybe that's something we can all talk about at another date, but that's an issue. Number 2 is I'd like to say that the Gateway Water Management Authority has done a tremendous job of trying to figure out projects and pay for those applications. And so, we've done that in the past. We support each other's memberships and provide that access. So, we look to folks to say, okay, we have a project, and then we call on our other members at our board meetings and say, and these are all, our members, by the way, are pretty much all of the cities in the Gateway region. We have Water Replenishment District, we have Central Basin, we have Long Beach Water, so it's a large coalition of members, and we all talk about similar needs. So if one entity needs, something, then we ask the others, do you need something? And then we look at it as a regional application and put it together, and our members pay for that application. So that is a tool and a resource that we provide, and I wanted to just make sure everybody was, knew about that. So we do support applications on a regional basis.
Thank you, Grace. I think, is it Wendy and then Debbie? Or Debbie, Wendy? Okay. And then Wendy afterwards.
Hi, my name is Deborah Dietz. I work for the Bureau of Sanitation. I work in Watershed Protection Division. I'm a landscape architect, which means I'm one out of 3,000 people who basically sees this picture a little bit differently than the rest of the people I'm working with, although they're my colleagues. I do see that there are some breaks between what needs to happen as water wonks, somebody said earlier, or bureaucrats, and what needs to happen as individuals in the community who are we're competing with their soccer games and their fun times and their weekends and all that, and I know everyone here knows that. But I think it's really up to us to figure out a way to make these projects offer a degree of success as a guarantee. I really think that's our job. I mean, I think we can do that through competition.
Say that again?
I think we need to guarantee a degree of success in our efforts. I don't think we should be asking if we are going to meet it or not. I think it needs to be there. And I'm saying that as a person more than an employee of a bureaucracy, because like I said, I'm a very misrepresentative sample of my bureaucracy. But I do feel that it's really our job to do something and to bring in, not pushing so much, but pulling more, what we can pull out of these communities from their worldviews, and figure out how we can foster a spirit of creativity and fun and non-oppressive conversations. I mean, a conversation needs to lure people out after work to want to do something, and I think it's more than just fun, ha-ha, let's do something lighthearted. It's also tied to the maintenance and the sustainability of the system. If we get people who are proud of what they've done and who see it as a competitive with, other watersheds, we've got 4 watersheds, that we work on in Los Angeles for our watershed master planning. And those 4 watersheds could have a spirit of competition in a healthy way, a healthy way that's fun, that we can capture the vision of this group, of all the people who are here today as a county or as different watersheds, so that people look forward to bringing their kids here as opposed to, they're unathletic kids who can't play soccer, I mean, there's just a whole nother way to look at this that both meets our technical goals, which are very much in the view of my office. My office is tied to TMDL compliance and regulations. But more than that, it brings people in from their country, from their experience, from their tribes. And that creates a beauty in the watershed, I think, that we haven't touched upon. And I think that's really where all of these general activities could lead us. Los Angeles is a trend center. We think differently. We have incredible people in our communities who are innovators. Our technical people, our bureaucrats, should not be charged with innovation. If they can't release the innovation of our communities, then we can't guarantee success.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing culture, fun as part of the question. I still, and it's Wendy, but I think I've heard Alf ask the question 3 times.
I want to answer it.
Okay, good.
So to your point, I wanted to bring up 2 things that I think are part of the lessons learned from the council over the last decade or so, walking through these trenches, and that is, 1, on the right messenger. John, your study pointed out that too many underserved communities didn't participate in the benefits of those funds. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing when you're talking about, well, how will they understand success, or how can we relate to them what this impact is going to be? Well, they won't know because we didn't invest in those communities in the first place. So we need the right messengers that understand the priorities and the challenges. And so I look to someone like Veronica over there, Veronica Padilla, for Pacoima Beautiful, who's engaged a community in an urban greening plan, an underserved community, and has had success. And she's done so by marrying water with community priorities: safety, health, access to transportation. When we can match water with the priorities of an individual community, which is going to be different across Greater LA, then I think we're going to see success. But it's matching the right messenger with the right priorities and the community priorities. That was point number 1. Number 2 is, in order to have success, we've got to remove some of the systemic barriers. The operation and maintenance point that Miguel raised when we were having a larger conversation with more nonprofits is that it's ginned up for failure. Because the city is going to have an incentive to choose the small median project for small infiltration gains, because tackling a larger unoccupied parcel is going to require new operations and maintenance commitments. So they're not going to pick the one that has greater water gains and can have a huge community impact on health and safety and water. So I think that following up and really digging deep on addressing the operation and maintenance obligations will help build a successful program.
Thank you, Wendy. Alan, did you have a question? Did you get?
Hi. I wanted to let people know that the decisions on the technical advisors have actually been made by the state board, and I wanted to let you know that Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is going to be your technical provider. And when I brought this to the attention of the state board, that probably wasn't a very good choice, we were basically told, well, that's the decision that we made. So I think we might need to go back and look at that, because when you talk about the right project and the right messenger, and you talk about, I don't know how many people in the room here work with Lawrence Berkeley Lab. If I had you raise your hand, would there be anybody here? So that's just part of the disconnect that we actually have that sort of underscores the problem, okay? I nominate Cindy. Yeah, okay? Like, we're gonna work on this because we're just on the first step and things have already kind of gone awry.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. I want to help answer Alf's question, because I agree with him that it's something that needs to be defined. In the time that I've been working with small systems here in the Southeast, dating back to the 1990s, one thing that becomes evident is that when you consider assistance to what we call now disadvantaged communities, the broader superstructure considers it charity. And I think that we can begin defining success when improving infrastructure and parks in small, poor, and older communities is not considered charity, but an important component of regional efficiency. When we stop the leaks in Maywood or in other small, older systems, when we recover contaminated water or wells that are inoperable, it helps everybody. It not only helps that community, it helps everybody because there's more surface water, imported water available to the greater population. So I think there needs to be general acknowledgement of the efficiencies that helping these poor, small, and older communities bring to everybody.
You actually have some reaction from the panel, so I'm going to have John, then Tracy, and then Russ.
Can I ask?
Okay, Russ, John, and then Russ.
Can I just ask, how many people in the room have read the entire Proposition 1 text? It's great. It's great that you have, but it's not that long. I read it. I had looked at it before, but in preparation for this, I read it. It took me maybe an hour to go through with a highlighter and a red pen, and I would really recommend that you do that because, one, Alf's a great writer of legislation, but two, and more importantly is these are your hooks. The legislative words are really important. They say what the voters voted for in allocating this money. And there are very, very specific results that they've promised to you. And you can use that as a tool. It's what we use to do our analysis, but because that's what the voters approved. That's where we should be holding. And that's what I think, Anthony Rendon and Kevin De Leon said, this is how you hold our feet to the fire. And this is how you get, this is how you get what you want. You go and you find the place. And you use that and push on it.
Thank you, John. Russ?
So I view my role today mostly as listening to you, to make sure that Grace and others get the information they need to set this up correctly. But I did want to react to several comments that have had a similar theme. I'm here primarily to talk about IRWIMP, the IRWIMP program, and how we can make the DACIP work. But I want to take a second and talk about the actual IRWIMP program. So IRWIMP stands for Integrated Regional Water Management. I think the program, some of us might view the term regional as with a bias. I would say the IRWIMP program is designed to maximize water supply, to maximize whatever benefits that are funded through the program to ensure that taxpayers get the largest return possible on their money. So typically, with the projects I see coming through IRWIMP are big-scale regional projects. We're talking about rehabilitation of dams. We're talking about rehabilitation of major spreading grounds. These are all necessary and needed projects that help out the entire region, affluent areas and DACs. But that's the direction, that's the theme of IRWIMP. They're large regional projects. That's what scores the best with the program. I'm really excited by this DACIP because for a while, the regional agencies and others that participate in IRWIMP have recognized that DACs are critical. It's on our radar screen. We understand this, but we haven't known how to factor these in. They don't fit well with the grant programs. So what the speaker was able to do with Prop 1 to dedicate these funds, to carve out a chunk, 10%, and if I understood correctly, I think it's actually 20% of the total IRWIMP funds is an amazing opportunity here. So I very much look forward to your participation in the process, to helping you determine how we rank that small project, how we rank a Maywood project, which is going to fix maybe a system that has 3,000 connections or 1,000 connections, how we weigh that against supplying 100,000 homes with water for a year, 50,000 additional acre-feet of water at some dam. Those are tough trade-off questions. Those are tough policy questions, and I think this process is going to help inform that. So thanks for these comments.
I'm going to thank Don, because I think that's a really good point, that this is regional, and maybe that's what this money, I mean, I have to admit, we didn't have like this plan, in writing this. We knew we wanted to make these commitments, but we didn't have, and that's why we're doing this meeting today. And I'm glad Grace has taken this on within the larger community. But I think Don makes a good point. It's not about charity. This is not about, oh yeah, we got to give some money to DACs, which is too often within the larger water community. Oh yeah, got to pay them off. I mean, that's literally, I've heard actually one person use that. Yeah, I got to pay off the DACs, that's because, and attributed to, oh yeah, the speaker represents, so we gotta, throw some money their way. That's not what this is about, and you're going to make that real. And it's not about charity; it's about regional. But that's a good point. Maybe this money does go to those smaller projects in disadvantaged communities that don't do as well on those big regional measures. And maybe that we need to measure it, and maybe the metrics are different. So it's not, you just served 100,000 people or 3 million people in the city of Los Angeles. You may need to balance that. Thank you. So all those great ideas. Thank you.
Tracy, and then you have the microphone, and then I see Meredith.
Okay, and
Go ahead.
I'll do a little bit of side and kind of contradict Russ with data. One of the things we have seen, we've funded over 600 projects. Our average grant amount per project is $1 million statewide. We have funded projects for as little as $100,000, as much as $10 million, and we have funded as much as 0.7% of one project, and as much as 100% of one project. So we do have a wide spread, but I have seen that there are a lot of small projects that come through, especially in our more rural areas. That's not where we are here today. But in some of our rural areas, $250,000 upgrade on the infrastructure is a huge investment in the community, and it makes a huge difference. So IRWM, and my bias going into it is we would be funding big regional projects. My experience after doing this for way too long is we're funding a lot of small projects or a lot of smaller amounts to a lot of projects.
Thank you, Tracy. Sorry, Lenny.
Good afternoon. My name is Lenny Chavez. I work for Carroll Engineers. We're a small engineering firm that specializes in water. I have just 2 points to make. I'd like to echo Grace's point on the definition. It makes it a little harder for us when we're applying on grants and try to define an actual DAC because maybe 5 blocks down a really rich person lives there, and it just kind of messes up the whole definition of the DAC. And we want to help our clients, LASAN and the smaller cities, be competitive in these grants. So that would be great help if we could address that difficulty. And I had one more question, which is, to what degree do you expect community engagement to go when we're talking about project concept development? Are we expected to present a plan of engagement? Are we expected to have already done some community engagement, and those activities, are those activities funded? And I'd also like to maybe shed a little bit of light on the educational component of this community engagement, because in listening to John's research, I wonder if there's the educational component of how good these multi-benefit projects really are for each community is just not there, and I'm just talking here and assuming. But I wonder if that's part of what can be funded.
So again, we have a very wide definition of what can be funded, and the way we are approaching this is we want to work with the funding areas and say, what do you need? Some funding areas may not have done much about assessing their disadvantaged communities, and may say, for the amount of money we have available, all we can do is really come up with identifying the communities and finding out where the needs are. Other areas might say, we have invested a lot of time and effort already, and we have a pretty good understanding of what the issues are, and so we want to focus in on the outreach, the engagement, the education, project development. So that is why we've written the process to say, you tell us what you want to do, and we'll figure out, if it's, within the ballpark of what we're willing to fund, and we'll work with you on that. So we aren't being prescriptive. So if you're saying we need education and outreach, and you can explain why you need that, we will most likely say yes. Again, no punch and cookies, no stipends, but so it is pretty open on what we'll fund. And then I think, but also real quick, one of the desired outcomes I think is since probably Prop 50, we've been hearing criticism of using the median household income as the indicator for disadvantaged communities. One of the possible desired outcomes out of this investment of funding statewide is there more than one way to identify what a disadvantaged community is, or is there a better way of disadvantaged community, establishing the definition, and is this a one-size-fits-all issue, or do we just confirm that maybe it isn't a one-size-fits-all?
That's a good, that's optimistic. Unemployment is always a good measurement.
It has problems too.
Yeah.
So I'd like a chance to respond to your question as well. I think Tracy gave you an answer on how the grant can work, and I'd like to give you some insight into how we think we're going to structure it here for the LA area, for the LA Basin. So Tracy shared what is eligible. In terms of putting this grant together, it is a grant, and we have to submit a proposal. So one of the cool things that DWR has done is to say, you can go ahead and develop your proposal, but again, I don't want some privileged people in a back room making this decision and submitting that and saying this is what our region needs. DWR is actually forcing us to go out and do engagement right now to talk to disadvantaged communities to say, what do you think we need? And that's part of what we're doing today to help us develop that scope of work, to give to Tracy to confirm it's consistent with the Prop 1 guidelines, for us to then turn around and actually implement. So over the coming month or so, Grace, we'll be hosting a series of workshops like these and other events where we're trying to solicit your input, your advice, your suggestions on how to structure the scope of work to actually do the engagement later on. So stay tuned, go to the website, there'll be announcements there of additional ways to participate, and spread the word, please.
And I'll make sure that everybody who registered here, and if you had a chance to write your information on the other sheet that was being passed around, that you get the information needed so that you're well aware of when things are happening. We have one more question. Is there any other question? Because I want us to have an opportunity to go through the voting exercise, and I want to give 2 minutes on that. I think it's valuable. A lot of these things that the questions of what is important to you, we want to make sure we capture that. So, Meredith, this is your question.
No pressure.
No pressure.
I just wanted to start with a thought, which is after a decade of sitting in IRWIMP meetings, I want some of those hours back. When you say, we want to know what the region wants, or we want to, we come down to the sub-region and we want to know what the need is. I am the only nonprofit sitting in my region, and so you're asking a group of bureaucrats, and they have an idea of what they need. They need saltwater intrusion well. That is an absolutely valid need for the health of the region. But Alf, when you say, what does success look like? A saltwater intrusion well does not get it. It's not what the community gets or understands or has any patience for. And so this idea that IRWIMP has always struggled with whose need's going to get met. And we keep coming down to the community backyard need, and the community always wants open space. They always want, things that improve community wellness. And it's really hard to make the link from saltwater intrusion well to community wellness. And, Prevention Institute, there's so many ways to benchmark wellness. We know how to do that. And I think that the group that's always missing is the community health, is public health at these meetings. And so for a city to say IRWIMP or this DAC money was successful is because our residents are healthier, our city is healthier. And I think if there's a way to keep coming back to that as a significant benchmark of success, are my kids safer? Are they playing outside? The fact that there's a stormwater, BMP underneath the park, not really important to most folks out there, but it takes an enormous amount of education to get a community to marry those two ideas. So the idea that we're going to get to actually hopefully apply for programming money to do community education, this all falls apart. This all stays at an absolute disconnect between what the county wants, what a city public works wants, and what the community wants. And until we can marry that and agree on some place, I think we're going to constantly bang our heads. We're going to spend $9 million and we're going to have nothing to show for it. So I would love to see some mechanism to bring back the watershed coordinators, because those were the people that went that know every single person in the community can sit at a small city's grant writer's desk and then jump back to the neighborhood council and jump there. Here, they're on the ground. It's one thing to write for a technical advisor who's somewhere completely disconnected from the city, but a watershed coordinator, and 10 years ago we wrote all the watershed plans, and at one point those people, those coordinators, knew everybody in that watershed. And we were able to move the ball in a huge way, and that money all went away. So
that starts to sound like a lot of stormwater capture projects along the Los Angeles River that are parks in dry times, because most of the time it's dry. Just a
So
Thank you, Meredith.
This
Can I-
might be a...
Before John, so I would say I'd like to close up, so if we can just take this opportunity to answer the question, or just a final thought. Alf, and then John, and then Tracy. And
final thought, this is the beginning, and help us make this work. You know, it's really going to take us reaching out to everybody, and so, yeah, keep hanging there.
So I mean, I agree with Alf, and I might have a somewhat unrealistic, and then it might not be totally bound by the text in the IRWIMP process here.
That's not the hook, then.
I'd like to see, I'd like to see the $9.8 million spent in a way that is effective within the IRWIMP process, but goes beyond that. So it's not just about the $810 million that's under Chapter 7 in Prop 1, but it's about the $4.45 billion that is under sections where disadvantaged communities are a priority. So that the 9.8 million here is spent effectively, and around the state, I'd like to see is spent effectively figuring out how communities can engage effectively, not just in the IRWIMP process, but in the whole thing. Because that's the big question in front of us, whether we're talking about parks or water or climate change. That's the big thing in front of us in California right now. And this is a really important historic step. And there's resources to make it happen. And I think it should be used in the service of this smaller thing. It's not small, it's 9.8 million and 810 million, but there's a lot more at stake here.
So you're going to need to force us to collaborate, and that means like DWR. I mean, thank you for DWR giving the advertisement for State Water Board, but that kind of thing. So maybe it is going into the safe drinking water, which may be somewhere else in another part of the bond. But so thank you. Interesting idea.
Tracy?
I'll go to the mic. I've been using
Did I give you a good opening, Tracy?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Alf. I think what we're looking at from the statewide perspective, because we are working not only with the LA Ventura area, but with 11 other regions throughout California, is we are hoping for synergistic benefits that come out with a greater benefit than the amount of money that is invested, and that this can be a stepping stone for other activities. If we have 12 different individual assessments of the needs of disadvantaged community, and we have an understanding throughout the state of California at the moment in time, can that help influence what the future is for water management and water quality and flood control throughout California? So I think this is an excellent opportunity to try and identify what the needs of the disadvantaged communities are, and to come up with hopefully broader benefits than if we just did this on a very narrow scale. So this is trying to be very high level, broad thinking, and I encourage you to do that.
Thank you, Tracy. Russ?
Sure, just a quick thought. I'd like to actually echo something that Meredith said, because it really resonates with my experience, and it's education. Involvement of disadvantaged communities in water management issues is very, very important. I would say that it's one of these issues that we don't understand, that the public in general doesn't understand. My experience, my career, the projects I've worked on, there are services that are offered to the public that they just don't care to understand. We have enough going on in our individual lives that I don't need to worry about where my water comes from. I don't need to worry about our incredibly fractured water management system here, where we're all siloed and have single purposes. I want to take my kids to soccer. I got my own job. I got to worry about putting food on the table. And so for us to be able to go out into the communities and to really isolate DACs, to study them, I think is a tremendous opportunity. not just to understand what their needs are, but to have it go both ways, to educate folks, to have them understand how their water system works. This is their community, this is where their water comes from, this is why it's important. And dare I say, that saltwater intrusion project, this is why it's important in the big scheme of things, although we should be working in your community as well. So I do look for this to go both ways, an opportunity to educate and to hear needs and do a needs assessment.
Thank you very much, Russ. So before everybody gets up, you have hopefully in your hand the power of vote. Green stickers. There are 9 different categories that are presented up there on the boards. The one that's not up there, it's a needs assessment because it's a required activity, so we didn't put that up there. But you have education, community outreach, engagement in the integrated regional water management efforts, facilitation, technical assistance, governance structure, site assessment, and enhancement of DAC aspects in the integrated regional water management plans, and project development activities or construction. And each one has a definition of an example activity and the deliverable that is the desired outcome. So, please take the time to do that. In closing, I want to pick up on Adan's comment of this is not charity, and to support your comment, John, that 9.8 million. I mean, there's 98 million for the region, and then there's a lot of other money out there, and we really have to capitalize on this opportunity to be able to learn how to work together, learn from each other on how to communicate and how to best take that information in so it feels amiable. So that we can move forward together. Otherwise, we're not going to get this. And, when you talked about that $2 billion, and if it's only set aside for nature and all these other things, I still don't get why, serving disadvantaged communities as a baseline, it's not understood that it will also help natural resources. So we have to get better at understanding that. Thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate your time. Please vote.